Since Oklahoma reinstated the death penalty in 1976, more than 120 people have been executed, placing the state among the top 3 in the nation for executions. But among those hundreds of names, only 10 have left an unforgettable mark. These individuals didn't just commit crimes. They haunted entire communities through actions that defied explanation and motives that left even seasoned investigators speechless. Then came the lethal injection chamber, where all that remained was a final meal and one last chance to speak to the world. Before we begin, leave a comment. Where are you watching from which country or state? Let's see how far these stories have traveled. Now let's begin with the first name. First, Wendell Arden Grissom. On the morning of November 3, 2005, in a quiet neighborhood near the town of Watonga, Oklahoma, a seemingly ordinary day turned into a tragedy. Drew Kopp was packing up her home preparing to move. With her were her 2 young daughters and a close friend, Amber Matthews, who had come to help. None of them knew that their home would become the random target of 2 men with dark intentions. Wendell Arden Grissom and his accomplice Jesse Floyd Johns chose Drew's house as part of a spur-of-the-moment robbery. When they realized people were inside, they didn't retreat, they confronted. A loud crash rang out as the glass door shattered. Grissom entered, bringing with him a real and immediate threat. In the chaos that followed, Drew was injured, but fought to protect her children. Amber, standing beside her, grabbed the girls and rushed them into a bedroom, trying desperately to shield them. She did not survive. The 2 children, by what can only be described as a miracle, were left physically unharmed. After fleeing the scene on an off-road vehicle, Grissom and John stopped at a roadside cafe. Their tense behavior drew attention, and a concerned citizen made a call. Soon after, both were arrested, ending a manhunt that had barely begun. For the community in Blaine County, the case was more than a shock. It was a grim reminder of how fragile the feeling of safety can be even inside your own home. Grissom was sentenced to death in 2008. During the trial and appeals, his attorneys argued that he suffered from brain damage caused by birth-related oxygen deprivation and childhood head trauma, evidence that was never presented to the jury. Still, the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board denied clemency by a vote of 4-1. On March 20, 2025, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAllister, Grissom was executed by lethal injection and pronounced dead at 10:13 in the morning. In his final words, he said, "I'm sorry to all of you that I hurt. I pray you can forgive me." His last meal included a Canadian bacon supreme pizza, a pint of vanilla ice cream, and a can of Coca-Cola. Second, Michael Dewayne Smith. On the morning of February 22, 2002, Oklahoma City was gripped by fear. 2 murders had occurred just hours apart in 2 separate areas of the city. Police and local media quickly concluded this was no coincidence. It was the beginning of a deadly spree. By one man, Michael Dewayne Smith. Smith, then 32, was known as a member of the Oak Grove Posse, a street gang based in the city's east side. People who knew him described a man heavily using drugs and often paranoid that he was being watched or betrayed. That paranoia sparked a deadly chain of events. His first victim was Janet Moore, age 41, a mother and insurance worker and the mother of Philip Zachary Jr., whom Smith believed had informed on him to police. That morning, Smith went to Moore's apartment looking for Zachary. When he couldn't find him, he confronted Janet. A heated argument followed, then a gunshot. Janet Moore died instantly, leaving the entire apartment complex in shock. Less than 3 hours later, Smith appeared at a convenience store about 5 miles away where Sarath Puluru, a 22-year-old college student from India, was working the morning shift. Investigators believe Smith thought Puluru had made a disrespectful comment about his gang in a media interview, though no such evidence was ever found. Smith entered the store carrying a gun. Once again, a shot rang out. Sarath Puluru collapsed behind the counter. Smith then set fire to the store trying to cover his tracks. 2 murders, 2 victims, one morning. Oklahoma City hadn't seen anything like it in years. Smith was arrested 2 days later and charged with first-degree murder in both cases. During questioning, he confessed but later retracted, claiming drug use had clouded his memory and that he couldn't recall the events. At trial, eyewitness testimony and video of his confession led to death sentences for both murders. Smith also received a life sentence for another killing committed in 2001. Before his execution, Smith expressed remorse and apologized to the victims' families but still maintained his innocence. He said, "I did not commit these crimes. I didn't kill those people. I was under the influence. I don't even remember being arrested." On April 4, 2024, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAllister, Smith was executed by lethal injection and pronounced dead at 10:20 in the morning. He declined a last meal and when asked for final words said, "No, I'm good." Third, Anthony Castillo Sanchez. On the morning of December 20, 1996, Julie Buskin, a 21-year-old dance major at the University of Oklahoma, began her final day in Norman. She had just completed her last semester and was preparing to return home to Benton, Arkansas to begin graduate school. The night before, Julie spent time saying goodbye to friends, people she had lived and trained with throughout her college years. Before sunrise, she drove her roommate to the airport, then headed back to her apartment at the Bridges Apartments complex. No one saw her after that moment. When Julie failed to meet her family as planned, she was reported missing immediately. Within hours, a search was underway. That evening, her body was discovered near Lake Stanley Draper, a wooded area in southeast Oklahoma City far from her home. She had been murdered. The case shook the local community not only because the victim was a talented student, but also because of the mystery surrounding her death and the lack of clear leads. For nearly a decade, the case remained cold. But in 2004, a breakthrough came when Anthony Sanchez, then serving time for burglary, was required to provide a DNA sample under the CODIS system. His DNA matched evidence found on Julie Buskin's clothing. Beyond the DNA match, investigators also found a shoe print that aligned with the type Sanchez once owned. A bullet recovered from the scene matched the kind of gun he had access to at the time. In 2006, Sanchez was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. He also received a 40-year sentence for rape. He maintained his innocence, claiming that his father was the real killer. However, courts rejected that claim based on the DNA and other evidence. On September 21, 2023, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAllister, Sanchez was executed by lethal injection and pronounced dead at 10:19 in the morning. In his final words, he said, "I'm innocent. I didn't kill anyone." His last meal included chicken fried, steak fried okra, mashed potatoes with gravy, a dinner roll, sweet iced tea, and apple pie with vanilla ice cream. Fourth, Scott James Eizembe. On the morning of October 18, 2003, in the town of Depew, Oklahoma, a quiet rural area with just over 500 residents, A.J. Hanters and Patsy Cantrell left their home to attend church. When they returned around 11 o'clock, something unthinkable had occurred. While they were gone, 42-year-old Scott James Eizembe had entered their home through the back door not to rob them, but to spy on his ex-girlfriend, Catherine Smith, who lived across the street. Eizembe had been in a relationship with Catherine, but it ended after he became threatening and violent. A restraining order barred him from approaching her home, but he continued to watch from a distance. When AJ, then 76, found Eizembe inside, he confronted him. A struggle broke out. During the altercation, Patsy, who had just come in, was shot with a .22 caliber pistol and died almost instantly. AJ was also fatally attacked. But Eizembe didn't stop there. He crossed the street to Catherine's house. She was not home, but her mother Mary and Catherine's 16-year-old son were inside. Eizembe broke in and brutally assaulted them both. They survived, but required immediate hospitalization. Mary later told police she believed she was going to die. After the attack, Eizembe fled into the dense woods outside town. A massive manhunt followed involving local, state, and federal authorities, including the FBI. For 37 days, Eizembe lived in the wilderness, evading capture and terrifying the community. Residents were warned not to go out at night, and children were told to stay home unless accompanied by an adult. By late November, Eizembe had made his way out of Oklahoma and into Arkansas and Texas. There, he kidnapped an elderly couple, Arlie and Virginia Zeller, from a hospital parking lot in Van Buren, Arkansas. He forced them to drive him to Texas. During the trip, he threatened them repeatedly, but at a gas station near Lufkin, Texas, Arlie, a former police officer, pulled a gun and shot Eizembe in the stomach. He was severely injured and arrested shortly after. The hunt for Eizembe became one of Oklahoma's largest law enforcement mobilizations, lasting over a month, spanning multiple states, and ending thanks to the courage of an ordinary citizen. At trial, Eizembe was sentenced to death for the murder of A.J. Cantrell and received a 150-year sentence for the killing of Patsy Cantrell. His defense argued that the murders were impulsive, not premeditated. Nonetheless, the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board denied clemency by a vote of 3-2. On January 12, 2023, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Eizembe was executed by lethal injection and pronounced dead at 10:15 in the morning. In his final words, he said, "I'm at peace. My conscience is clear. I love my children." His last meal included a medium-rare ribeye steak and 2 servings of French fries. 5th, Benjamin Robert Cole, Sr. On December 20, 2002, in the town of Claremore, Oklahoma, a tragedy unfolded inside the small home where Benjamin Robert Cole Sr. lived with his wife and baby daughter. 9-month-old Brianna Cole was their only child. Neighbors described Cole as a reclusive man who kept to himself, but what happened that day would never be forgotten by the community. According to investigators that morning, 37-year-old Cole was playing video games when Brianna began to cry. Instead of comforting her, he became irritated. In a sudden outburst, he picked her up and inflicted a fatal injury. The baby gradually lost consciousness. What shocked the public was not only the violent act, but Cole's cold response. He did not call for help or notify anyone. Instead, he went back to playing his video game. Only when Brianna's condition failed to improve did he dial 911. By the time paramedics arrived, she had stopped breathing and was later pronounced dead at the hospital. Cole was arrested immediately. Investigators quickly gathered medical evidence and a statement from his wife, who had been home but said she was asleep and did not witness the assault. In 2004, Cole was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. However, his case dragged on for nearly 2 decades due to ongoing disputes over his mental competency. Defense attorneys repeatedly argued that Cole was no longer mentally fit for execution, citing diagnoses of schizophrenia, brain damage, and years of extreme isolation, during which he barely spoke to anyone for over 10 years in prison. Still, experts appointed by the state of Oklahoma disagreed, stating that Cole understood the nature of his punishment. The Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board ultimately voted 4-1 to deny clemency, ending the long-standing debate. On the morning of October 20, 2022, at the state prison in McAlester, Benjamin Cole was led into the execution chamber. He chose not to speak at length, but just before the injection, he quietly said, "Choose Jesus while you still can." He did not request a special last meal. Instead, he received the standard prison meal vegetarian lasagna salad, a tortilla, and a fruit drink, simple and quiet, much like his final years in solitary confinement. 6th, Gilbert Ray Postelle. On the morning of May 30, 2005, Memorial Day, a shooting at a trailer home on Dell Road in southeast Oklahoma City stunned the entire community. 18-year-old Gilbert Ray Postelle, along with his brother David and their father Brad, had planned a targeted ambush. Their intended victim was Donnie Swindle, whom the Postelle family believed was involved in a motorcycle accident the year before that had left Brad with a brain injury. That belief was never supported by any official investigation. Around 5 in the morning, the group approached Swindle's home carrying at least 2 AK-47 rifles. At the time, Swindle was there with 3 others: 57-year-old James Alderson, 26-year-old Terry Smith, and 26-year-old Amy Wright, none of whom had any connection to the earlier accident. All four were caught off guard. According to the investigation, over 30 rounds were fired. Wendell died instantly. Two others were shot while trying to flee. Some witnesses described the scene as a mass execution. Gilbert Postelle was arrested a few days later and charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming shell casings, eyewitness accounts, and his own confession during interrogation. Prosecutors described the murders as a blind act of revenge with no legal basis. He was sentenced to death for 2 of the killings and received life without parole for the other 2. His brother David was sentenced to life in prison while their father Brad died before charges could be filed. The fact that all 3 were involved in a mass killing shocked the public. At his clemency hearing in December 2021, Postelle admitted guilt and expressed remorse. His attorney shared that Postelle had a low IQ and had been using methamphetamine since the age of 12. The Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board denied clemency by a vote of 4-1. On February 17, 2022, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Postelle was executed by lethal injection and pronounced dead at 10:14 in the morning. He offered no final words. His last meal included 20 chicken nuggets with ranch barbecue and honey mustard sauces, 3 large orders of fries with ketchup, a crispy chicken sandwich, a regular chicken sandwich, a large cola, and a caramel frappe. 7th, Ronald Clinton Lott. In late 1986 and early 1987, 2 brutal murders in Oklahoma City sent shockwaves through the community. The victims were elderly women who lived alone, 83-year-old Anna Laura Fowler and 93-year-old Zelma Cutler. On November 2, 1986, Fowler's body was found in her home, lying in bed. There were no signs of forced entry. However, the scene showed clear signs that she had been attacked while sleeping. Just weeks later, on January 21, 1987, Zelma Cutler was found dead under nearly identical circumstances in her own home, only a few blocks away from Fowler's. The similarities were chilling. Elderly victims living alone found in bed, and both had died from asphyxiation. Forensic experts confirmed that both women showed signs of assault before death. Due to the pattern and public pressure, Oklahoma City police arrested Robert Lee Miller Jr., a black man who lived near the crime scenes. Based on a confession reportedly obtained after hours of questioning without legal counsel, Miller was charged and sentenced to death in 1988. However, in the 1990s, advances in DNA testing prompted a re-examination of physical evidence, including semen samples from the scenes. The DNA conclusively ruled out Miller and instead matched Ronald Clinton Lott, a convicted rapist who was already in custody in another state. Robert Lee Miller Jr. was released in 1995 after nearly 9 years of wrongful imprisonment. Lott was extradited to Oklahoma and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Prosecutors proved that he was in Oklahoma City at the time of the killings, and the DNA evidence was undeniable. In his 2001 trial, a jury convicted Lott of both murders and recommended the death penalty for each. Lott made no final statement before his execution. On December 10, 2013, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Lott was executed by lethal injection and pronounced dead at 6:06 in the evening. His last meal came from Long John Silver's and included fried fish French fries and hush puppies served with tartar sauce and ketchup. During his clemency hearing, Lott apologized to the victims' families and pleaded for forgiveness. "I'm deeply sorry for what I did, and I hope they can forgive me." However, he made no final statement at the time of his execution. 8. James Louis DeRosa. On the evening of October 2, 2000, in the peaceful rural area of Poteau, Oklahoma, a cold-blooded double murder shocked the community. 23-year-old James Louis DeRosa had previously worked part-time on the farm of Curtis and Gloria Plummer. During his time there, the Plummers were said to have treated him kindly, offering food, timely pay, and even personal guidance. But after being passed over for more work, DeRosa began to harbor resentment. along with his friend 21-year-old John Eric Castleberry DeRosa, devised a plan not just to rob, but to kill the elderly couple who once helped him. That night, they approached the plumber's home under the pretense of looking for work. Welcomed inside, they made their move. Castleberry restrained Curtis while DeRosa went after Gloria. What followed was a brutal attack. Both Curtis and Gloria Plummer were stabbed multiple times, especially in the neck and upper body. The wounds were fatal, and neither had a chance to call for help. Shockingly, after committing the murders, DeRosa and Castleberry stole just $73 in cash and an old pickup truck. They abandoned the vehicle near a remote lake in an attempt to mislead investigators. The case was quickly investigated. Castleberry was arrested first and immediately confessed, placing most of the blame on DeRosa. In exchange for his cooperation, he received life without parole. His testimony was crucial in bringing DeRosa to justice and ultimately to death row. Another accomplice, Scotty Wayne White, who had driven them to the scene, was sentenced to 25 years in prison for his role after the crime. In 2001, DeRosa was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. The jury cited financial motive and the particularly cruel nature of the killings as aggravating factors. During his clemency hearing in 2013, DeRosa admitted to the murders, expressed remorse, and apologized to the victim's family. Still, the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board denied clemency by a vote of 3-2. On June 18, 2013, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, DeRosa was executed by lethal injection and pronounced dead at 6:07 in the evening. He declined a special last meal and was served the prison's standard dinner. When asked if he had any final words, DeRosa simply said, "No, ma'am. Night." Scott Allen Hain. In the early morning hours of October 6, 1987, a brutal crime in Tulsa, Oklahoma left the community in shock. 17-year-old Scott Allen Hain, along with 21-year-old accomplice Robert Lambert, carried out a kidnapping and double murder that claimed the lives of 27-year-old Michael Houghton and 22-year-old Laura Lee Sanders. Hain and Lambert, while waiting to rob a nearby home, noticed Houghton and Sanders sitting in Sanders' car outside a bar. They approached the vehicle, threatened Houghton with a knife, and forced both victims into the car. Hain drove away, then stopped to rob Houghton. When Houghton resisted, Hain locked him in the trunk. Sanders was also placed inside. The attackers drove to a remote area in Creek County. There, they transferred Sanders' belongings to Houghton's pickup, cut the gas line of her car, and set it on fire with both victims trapped inside, screaming. Hain and Lambert fled the scene, leaving Houghton and Sanders to burn alive. After the murders, they escaped to Wichita, Kansas, where they spent the stolen money. They returned to Tulsa and were arrested on October 9, 1987. In his 1988 trial, Hain was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, along with kidnapping, armed robbery, auto theft, and arson. In 1993, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals overturned his death sentence due to improper jury instructions. But in 1994, Hain was resentenced to death. Hain appealed repeatedly, arguing that executing someone for a crime committed before turning 18 was unconstitutional. All appeals were denied. On April 3, 2003, Hain was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. He became the last person in the United States executed for a crime committed as a juvenile before the Supreme Court banned such executions in 2005. For his final meal, Hain requested 3 cheeseburgers, 3 orders of onion rings, ice cream, and a frozen drink. When asked if he had any final words, Hain simply said no. 10. J. Wesley Neill. On December 14, 1984, the town of Geronimo, Oklahoma, witnessed one of the most horrific massacres in the state's history. 19-year-old J. Wesley Neill and his boyfriend Robert Grady Johnson carried out a bank robbery that left 4 people dead and 3 others injured. The case shocked the nation, not only for its violence, but for the controversy surrounding Neill's trial and death sentence. Facing financial troubles, Neill and Johnson plotted to rob the First Bank of Chattanooga in Geronimo, the same bank where they had a joint account. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Neill entered with a gun and forced 3 bank employees, 42-year-old Kay Bruno, 19-year-old Jerry Bowles, and 25-year-old Joyce Malenix, who was 6 months pregnant, into a back room. There, he brutally attacked and killed all 3. While this was happening, 3 customers, 33-year-old Ralph Zeller, 20-year-old Reuben Robles, and his 15-year-old wife Belen, along with their 14-month-old daughter, entered the bank. Neill forced them into the back and opened fire. Zeller was killed. The Robles couple survived but were seriously injured. Neill attempted to continue the attack but was interrupted. Neill and Johnson fled to San Francisco, California, where they were arrested 3 days later at a hotel using the stolen money to pay their bill. Neill was sentenced to death in 1985. Due to errors during trial, the sentence was overturned and retried again, resulting in a death sentence. During appeals, his attorneys argued that the prosecution's focus on Neill's sexual orientation was discriminatory. The court acknowledged the issue but ruled it did not change the outcome. On December 12, 2002, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, J. Wesley Neill was executed by lethal injection and pronounced dead at 6:18 in the evening. He made no final statement. His last meal was modest: a double cheeseburger, large fries, cranberry grape juice, and a slice of fruit pie, a quiet end to a life remembered for terrifying violence. Each story in this list is a tragedy not only for the crimes themselves, but for the irreversible loss left behind. The victims were never given the chance to choose a final meal, nor to say a last word. They died in pain, leaving empty spaces in the lives of their loved ones. Justice was served, but the grief remains. And for us watching through a screen, we have a choice. We can listen, we can reflect, and we can commit to protecting our communities better. If one of these stories moved you the most, share it in the comments. It's how we remember the victims, not with silence, but with awareness and action. See you in the next video.